The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. On the X-Zone Broadcast Network, our growing family of broadcast affiliates right around the world, and on TalkStream Live. You can visit us online at www.xzoneradio.com. And if you'd like to see all the great programming we have in store for you on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit our broadcast network site at xzbn.net. My guest this hour is Mark Wyatt, and we're going to be talking to Mark about everything from afterlife communication to ghosts. And joining me now from the United Kingdom is Mark Wyatt. And Mark, welcome to the X-Zone.
Thank you, Rob.
Great having you with us. Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Right, okay. I recently, in March, I put out my... Are you picking me up okay? I'm getting a lot of feedback here,
No,
sorry.
We've got you nice and clear here.
Okay. In March, I put out my first book. It's called Wyatt's Weird World, and it was my way of just putting down everything that I had experienced since I was a young lad. I'm in my mid-50s now, in terms of paranormal experiences. So it wasn't a biography as such. It was just a look at the dark side, if you like, of everything that's gone on since I was about 9 or 10. Starting with my father's story, which actually got me interested in the paranormal in general.
And what was your father's story, if you don't mind us asking?
Well, in 1960-61, I was still a baby at the time, and I heard all this story. This sort of story came back to me through the family, sort of in years to come, really. It became part of a sort of family legend, really. He was a steam engine driver. I think he called them engineers out your way. And he used to regularly do this commute through the countryside. Bear in mind, this was the 60s, early 60s, and it was a very, very different world, really. Sort of 3 or 4 miles to work, across country. Did it for a few years, no problems whatsoever. And one evening he was coming home and he saw some sort of weird spectre on a bicycle. He didn't know it was on, he approached it from behind. It was like a strange light. And he said it looked like a guy on a bicycle, an old fella. And to cut a long story short, because it'd take a long time to tell that one, but it's not my story, it's his story. As he passed it, he spoke to this character, and the character turned round to him, and it had no face. It was just like a void. And shortly after that, it just disappeared, and there was nowhere it could have gone. And there's so much more to that. I mean, we lived on the site of an old gunpowder works, where there'd been sort of many fatalities for sort of something bordering on 400 plus years.
Wow.
So, there was activity in the area. I mean, he didn't know that then. And we were actually living on the site. The site had shut down in the 1920s. And this was 40 plus years later. And there's a pub nearby. The actual sighting he had happened near the pub. It's all very close together. And this pub, we found out years later when I started researching it, used to store the parts of the bodies from the various fatal explosions.
Ooh.
And they used when these accidents happened, in those days they hadn't learned how to sort of make huge walls to sort of limit the damage to people and property. So if something, if a spark caused an explosion in the works, it would take out, maybe 10 people instead of, one if they'd fought ahead. They sort of learnt as they went. And basically people, it's very grim, but people were blown to pieces. And they used to put all the pieces in the pub until they could give them a Christian burial. So we think, I think definitely that there's all the activity around that area is connected to those sudden losses of life. Mm-hmm. And there's also opposite the pub, very close. It's a very small village, sort of in a beautiful valley. There's a railway station, and in all the research I've done over the years, and just my thinking about it, I think there's some connection between paranormal activity, water, which you need for the gunpowder works. There's a river running through the works, which is the Tillingbourne, and on the opposite of the pub, you've got a railway station. And obviously you've got high voltage. So I often wonder whether there's a connection between the high voltage and the water, perhaps. And, the loss of life is causing some sort of disruption of whatever it is, time or... and it's just playing back to certain people who are able to tune into it. So that was basically his story. He saw this character. It freaked him out. And according to my mother, she used to tell us that he came in and sort of slammed the door and couldn't really speak properly for about half an hour.
Oh my God!
He was very sort of unnerved by it, and he would never. I think he told the story twice, and I'm in my 50s. He died a few years ago.
Oh,
he told the story twice that I can remember. The story tended to come from my mother because he didn't like to remember it, and he wasn't really prone to paranormal activity generally. So I think if you are prone to it, there's two ways of dealing with it. You either enjoy it and you just accept it, or you sort of clam up and don't talk about it. And he was probably one of the second.
So what kind of paranormal experiences have you yourself had?
Well, mine didn't really start until probably I was about probably 9 or 10. Mm-hmm. My very first one, it's not very exciting, but my very first one I can remember, we were having a family tea, and we used to have like a big Sunday tea with my nan, who used to turn up on a Sunday. And we were just sat around eating, and for some reason I had to go up to my bedroom to get something. This was like a Sunday tea time, sort of winter time, so it's fairly dark. And as we lived in an ordinary 3-bedroomed local authority house, but it was right in the countryside. And as I walked up the stairs and turned into the landing, to walk along the landing to go to my room, as I turned the corner to head towards my door, I suddenly felt a hand, actually, and I could feel the fingers, I could feel the pressure. I felt a hand on my shoulder, as if somebody was stood behind me. And I naturally turned around. I knew it, even when I was turning around, I knew nobody was up there because everybody was downstairs, And that sort of slightly freaked me out. So I think that was probably my earliest paranormal experience. People have said to me, it could have been sort of change of temperature, or they've given me lots of. But when these things happen to you, what it is,
Sure.
You can't maybe prove it, but yourself what happened. That was the first one, and we had a lot of activity in that house. Now I just suffered from the occasional nightmare, like most people did. I suppose most kids would have done. So where to draw the line between what was a nightmare and what was reality, in inverted commas, I don't really know on that. But just to tell you a little story about that time, we had an elderly lady, or an elderly couple, living right next door to us, and we had a passageway between our two houses. And as I say, this is open countryside behind us. We've got about 4 miles of open countryside. It's a very beautiful valley. It's part of the same valley where the gunpowder works was, but that was, a couple of miles up the road. And in past times, they would have used this river, the Tillingbourne, as an access to get to the gunpowder works and also to a mill, an old mill, which was even closer on the other direction. And this old lady would regularly come round in the morning and say to my father, she'd say, Bob, did you see those strange men coming up the path last night? And to cut a long story short, she used to see these strange figures, sort of slightly foggy type figures, sort of just a strange sort of light to them, walking up our pathway towards our house. And she would say that they looked sort of lost. They looked sort of confused, as if they were lost in the countryside and they were cutting through our garden, which, if you knew the geography of the area, was it was never going to happen because it was the shortcut to nowhere, really. But she would watch these figures. She had no idea or no thinking that these were in any way paranormal. She used to just see figures coming up the path. And they would head towards the passageway between our two houses. So she was curious, and she would run through to the front of her house, which was literally, just a few feet from ours. And she would wait at the front window to watch them emerge and coming to our road. But of course they never did. Now this happened regularly, and she told us several times. And we used to just think, oh, she's a little bit eccentric, and just sort of smiled when she told us these stories. But a few years later, maybe, I'm just trying to think, it would have been the mid-70s, probably, a bit later than that. My granddad got very ill, and he had a stroke, and he ended up living with us. And he would be sat in our room downstairs during the daytime, and occasionally he would say to my father, or whoever was around, he'd say, Bob, who are those strange men coming up the path? Now, he'd never spoken to this lady next door, probably to say hello at the most. He wasn't aware of these stories. And this happened a few times, and that, in later years, that got me thinking as to the true nature of reality of time, because maybe he was seeing some sort of playback. And maybe when you've had a stroke, it changes the chemistry in your brain in various ways, doesn't it? Maybe that sort of puts you slightly off kilter, and you're more aware of other realities, if you like, going on around you, which ordinarily we're not designed to experience, if that makes sense.
It does. It does make perfect sense.
So I think in our everyday lives, we're not designed to see all this stuff. And I think some of us, for whatever reason it is, occasionally, some more than others, we occasionally tune into it. I mean, it's not by choice, I have to say. So that's my thinking on it anyway. So they were my early experiences of a hand. And then the other one wasn't really my experience, but it happened around me. But quite frequently we would see sort of thing. I mean, my younger brother saw an old lady walk into our bedroom one night. We were in, this was around about the same time. We slept in these bunk beds, and he was on the top one, and he swore blind that about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, the door opened, and this little old lady walked in. She just looked at me, looked at him, gave him a smile, and then walked out again. Now, we had no little old ladies in our house, but he always sort of maintained he saw this. Right. So I think, whether it's for house or whether it's the people, I wouldn't say the people, because he wasn't really prone to it either. I think that was his only story. But I think sometimes, well, it's both. It's the person and the house, because I've moved around a lot around this country, and wherever I've been, stuff happens. Not regularly.
So do you think that most people like yourself, or some people like yourself, are more attuned into what we call the paranormal? That you and others who were as attuned just look at this as normal?
Well, it has become my normality. Yeah. Definitely, I agree. And yes, definitely some people are more tuned in than others. I mean, I know people who see a lot more than I do. I mean, if you read the book in isolation, you just think, oh, this guy you know, it's a bit like that film where the little boy says, "Oh, I see dead people," you know, which always makes me laugh, you know. But I don't really see them that frequently. I mean, if you sort of go through the book and work it all out, it's probably only maybe once every couple of years or something like this, you know. So, but these memories obviously linger long because they were so real to me at the time.
Let me ask you something here. This may be a little off the wall, but what do you consider to be the meaning of life? And is it possible that your interpretation or your definition of the meaning of life ties into this somehow?
Oh, that's a good one. The meaning of life, right? I can only speculate. I believe that we may possibly have some sort of agreement to come and do a job, to live on this planet as a particular person in a particular family. This is only my thinking. I don't know this. And we come here to experience, to learn, and maybe we come back again and again until we've learned a few lessons. Sorry, what was the other part of the question?
I was asking that if your meaning of life, your definition of a meaning of life, could be the reason why that you're experiencing all these, and I'll quote you here, weird things in your weird world. Yes, yeah.
I mean, it's a difficult one to answer because I experience these things, but I don't know that. I wouldn't say I think it's just I'm more tuned in, and as some of us are,
right?
And maybe other people maybe whether their brain just cuts it off at source almost. So maybe they might see something, but they would never talk about it for a start off. Or they would write it off and convince themselves that they didn't see something, or that they didn't hear a voice next door to them when there was nobody there, this sort of thing. So yeah, in that way, I suppose we'd sort of deal with this in our own way.
Let me ask.
Sorry.
Let me ask you this: What was your reason for writing your book, Wyatt's Weird World?
Right. Well, it's twofold, really. I was already writing. I was writing mostly sort of biographical sort of stuff for my family more than anything, for future generations, because I consider that I've had a fairly interesting life, really, having moved around a lot and done a few different jobs. And I wanted future generations to sort of read it and sort of enjoy it. I mean, there's a lot of humour in it as well. And you know, sort of Mickey taken out of myself, really. And so I was doing all that for many years, but at the same time, on my sort of back burner, if you like, I'd had all these experiences for years. I discussed them with various friends that I knew I could trust, who had similar experiences. You can always speak with people who've had similar experiences. And I just thought, well, I should really jot these down. And I thought, well, where do I start? Well, obviously, I start when I was young. And I'd asking myself questions. Well, what set me off on this path? And obviously, it was my father's story. So I used that as a basis to sort of get the timeline going, if you like, and then worked my way as many experiences as I could remember. And I think it comes out something like 25 plus in the book, I think it is. But even now, occasionally when I'm chatting to various people who are into this stuff, they will remind me of another thing that happened, which I didn't put in the book. So there may well be sort of 50 plus for all I know. But it was almost like a form of therapy as well, because I wanted to, but I think by writing it all out or typing it all out and sort of putting it there for future generations, it was like, how to explain it? It was like putting it behind me almost, it was like accepting it. It was almost a bit like coming out. It was like saying, okay, this is me. My name's Mark. Weird. I nearly said a rude word there. Weird stuff happens to me occasionally. This is what's happened. And it was almost like, because I know there's a hell of a lot of skeptics out there who have never, ever experienced anything like this, who would be very quick to jump on it and say, oh, that's your imagination, mate, you know. You've got a very active imagination or whatever. And it was just my way of almost, in a polite, it was like my way of putting two fingers up to him and saying, well, you know, it happened to me. This is me. I'm proud of who I am. This stuff has happened. I know it's happened. I don't need their consent. I don't need their approval.
Right.
I think that's what I'm looking for, really. It's like I just didn't need their approval to actually, you know, in the past, I would have been a bit reluctant to talk about this stuff maybe in public. But now I've got to an age in my 50s where I think I don't care anymore. I know it happened, and that's all that matters to me. Now, whether what has happened, all of these sort of, I say ghost in inverted commas because we don't really know what they are, do we?
No, we don't.
And I have, you know, and what I'm trying to get over is it's only my interpretation. I have seen stuff and I've heard stuff that cannot be explained by, you know, Newtonian science or whatever. And I can't prove it to others, but I know it happened. But I am fully aware that it could well be something to do with my brain, my mind, and not just mine, but all of us, in that our reality is maybe not quite what we think it is. And some of us are getting glimpses of other realities, whether that's to do with time or other worlds or both. I think it's probably a bit of everything. And it's just my brain's I mean, as we know, we all receive information through our eyes and it's processed by the brain and so on. And it's played back to us on a screen, if you like. So this all plays a part, doesn't it?
Well, yes, especially with the field of quantum mechanics opening up and the possibility of multiverses, multi-dimensions. You know, we're just scratching the surface.
Yes, exactly. We know so little. And I mean, I'll give you a silly little thing. I mean, just recently, a few months ago, I decided I'd write the next book. And instead, because I've got all my own experiences out of the way, well, as many as I could remember, and I don't fancy doing another one of those, I thought, well, I'd like to write one about the area I live in. And I'm in the UK. I'm in the far west in Cornwall, which historically was a separate country. It has a totally different culture down here. And I mean, many books have been written about Cornwall and the paranormal, but I wanted to do my own take on it and try and get some stories or experiences, I should say, from other people, which hadn't been covered, because every time you buy a book about the paranormal in Cornwall, you get the same stories come up over and over again. You know, you get the stories about ghosts in Bodmin Jail and Bude Castle and these sort of things. And I wanted some more sort of current stories, if you like.
Right.
And I had a lot of friends around this area. I live on the north coast, right on the coast, on the cliffs really, or near the cliffs. And quite a few people I know had sort of very strange experiences around here, including seeing weird lights at sea flying around and zipping off at amazing speeds. That's quite common. And a few sort of ghost sightings, in inverted commas, whatever they are. So I thought I'd write all these, or sort of fish out there for stories from people to get some interesting stories. And I've had about 50 good ones come in. But in my very first attempt to get these experiences from people, I put a message out on Facebook, I think it was, and on a local community page, only sort of 8 miles down the road. I was just putting it on various places.
Listen, we're going to have to do a bit of a cliffhanger here, because I've got to take my bottom of the hour break. So please stand by. X-Zone Nation, Mark Wyatt is our special guest. He's the author of Wyatt's Weird World. And what's your website, Mark?
It's called It's a Dark, Dark Night. And it's not just my stuff on there. I put other people's paranormal information.
All right, we'll talk more about that when we come
Okay.
back from this break. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Whatever you do, don't go away. We'll be back after this short break. And the X-Zone News with our sweetheart in Sydney, Nova Scotia, the one and only Amanda Curran.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Radio's authority on the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, celebrating 25 years of broadcasting. Broadcasting around the world and to the great beyond.
Join High Tech with Corey K. weekly here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. From the world of computers to the ever-popular computerized gadgetry that are becoming part of our everyday life and living and society. From kids and their gaming devices, teens and their smartphones, to the applications of personal and business computers. From hardware to software, from standalone units to network computers. Join high-tech guru Corey K. weekly right here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network as he takes on the topics that will be of use and great value to the international audience of the X-Zone Broadcast Network. High Tech with Corey K. weekends at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
This is News from the X-Zone. I'm Amanda Curran. NASA has just posted new pictures of Saturn as it undergoes its change of seasons. The Cassini mission has compared photos taken of the shadow of Saturn on its rings, which had stretched across all of its rings earlier in the Cassini mission, but now barely makes it past the Cassini division. Researchers point out that as the planet nears its North Hemisphere solstice in May 2017, the shadow will get even shorter, as during the solstice, the shadow's edge will be about 28,000 miles from the planet's surface, barely making it past the middle of the B ring. You can check out the pictures at nasa.gov/Cassini. From Saturn to Venus, new research now suggests that Venus may not have always been the hottest planet in the solar system, and that it may have even been habitable for life. Researchers have pointed out for the last few years the fact that Earth and Venus are surprisingly similar in size, density, and composition, and that their close proximity suggested that they were probably formed using the same base materials. New climate models even indicate that up to 3 billion years ago, Venus could have had mild Earth-like temperatures and liquid oceans. Scientists are still hoping to answer how such a planet could start off so similar to Earth and then change so drastically, and NASA is now actually considering sending more missions to Venus for insight into those very questions. A new audio clip posted online claims to be evidence of a man possessed. Jamie Barrientos says for the last several weeks, his neighbor, who seems quite normal during the day, becomes totally demonic every night during the hours of 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. The audio captures his groaning and growling, possibly in different languages, while accompanied by the sound of banging furniture. Barrientos stated that the noises got so loud and frequent, police had to be called, where the neighbor apologized, attributing the outbursts to a vague illness. People who have listened to this terrifying clip have suggested everything from drug abuse to mental illness and even satanic ritual practice. The late-night disturbances have yet to stop. I'm Amanda Curran, News from the X-Zone.
This is Kevin Randall. For nearly 30 years, I have been investigating the case of the Roswell UFO. I have interviewed hundreds of people and stood on the crash site. Now in Roswell in the 21st century, I have reviewed dozens of hours of audio and videotaped interviews, examined hundreds of files that relate to the crash, and have returned to Roswell in an attempt to put all that information into the proper perspective. For the first time in Roswell in the 21st century, I have made a dispassionate reevaluation of all that material and provide a new look at what happened. This is a book that clears away all the clutter that has hidden the truth for so long strips away the various lies that surround the case, exposes the Air Force attempts at cover-up, and found a core of solid information that tells us all where the case stands today. Roswell in the 21st Century will be available in just a few weeks. For more information, please visit my website at www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com.
Gibbs A. Williams, Ph.D., is a practicing psychoanalyst, supervisor, researcher, and author in New York City. Much of his life has been dedicated to understanding nature and the uses of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities. His radical and original non-Jungian, non-mystical, non-magical theory of synchronicities illuminates much of the fog surrounding this challenging and perplexing topic. His ideas and manners are fresh, presented in a style that is both entertaining and highly informative. He is also an expert on crisis intervention, specially focused on violence reduction for the police and citizens, mastering anxiety, frustration, and stress without the use of medication, and effectively preventing and treating heroin addiction. Dr. Williams can be contacted at his email address at gwwilliamsny11@aol.com or visit his website at www.drgibbswilliams.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone radio show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, High Tech with Corey K, and every minute of the 24/7, 365 programming of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 712-432-9459, courtesy of TalkStream Live. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 712-432-9459 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 712-432-9459 for the best of paranormal, new age, thought-provoking, sci-fi radio programming 24/7, 365.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from live and around the world from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and TalkStream Live. If you'd like to send them an email, studio@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV, and our radio website at www.xzoneradio.com. And why I make the differentiation between our radio site is because we also have our TV show site at www.xzonetv.com, where you can watch the first season of the X-Zone TV show, all 13 episodes, with our compliments. Mark Wyatt is our guest this hour, X-Zone Nation. We're talking about the paranormal. He's the author of Wyatt's Weird World. And his website, it's a dark, dark night. And based on your book, based on the people that you've talked to over the years, sharing stories, because certain people you feel more comfortable with sharing your stories.
Yes. What
is the strangest or weirdest story that you have either experienced or have heard from someone else?
I would, just off the top of my head, the one that sprung to mind immediately, and I'm sure there are others. We lived in Northumberland. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible because it's quite a long story. We lived in Northumberland, which is sort of Newcastle way in the UK. We were out in the countryside, on the River Tyne, but out in the countryside, a lovely valley, on the site of old coal mines. There would have been mines underneath them, but we had a lot of activity in the house. It started off with, at the time I was in my very early 30s. I had 3 small children, married, and both my wife and myself, when we came home to the house, we would quite frequently feel that the other person was there already, although we knew that they weren't. So I knew she was at work, but I felt somebody was in the house. And this happened a lot, and we'd hear little movements around the house. And, we would call out to each other and then realise, well, actually, they're not here. And then we'd think, well, that's strange, because we just had this overwhelming feeling that somebody was in the house with us. Now, I didn't mention this to my wife because I didn't want to frighten her. And she was, unknown to me, she was having the same feelings exactly. And one day she mentioned it to me. And there were little things that were happening sort of during the early hours as well, strange things going on, like lights and things appearing in the bedroom, this sort of thing. That's another story completely. But my wife went out and she used to buy all these, sort of go to the second-hand shops and buy little trinkets and things that interested her. And I tell the story a lot better in the book because it was there's a lot of quite amusing dialogue in there, if I say so myself, which is based on the fact of what was going on when this happened. But she came home one day with the usual sort of bits and pieces that she'd found. And amongst these pieces in her bag, there was a plate which was wrapped in brown paper. And it turned out that this plate, now I should point out she has a bit of a visual problem. And she didn't realise, I don't think she realised, that it had an inscription on this plate. And it was a golden wedding plate. It was obviously been made to give to somebody on their golden wedding. So it's some elderly couple had received this plate. And without I can't remember the names. I think I called them Mabel and George or something, because I couldn't remember the names. But it was something like, to Mabel and George on your golden wedding, congratulations. And it was, sort of gold enamelled and all the rest of it with the inscription. But she'd taken a fancy to this thing, bought it home. And she, it's like, oh, look what I've got. And I was going through the bits and pieces. And I said, well, why do you want this in the house? And she said, well, it looks nice. And I said, well, do you realise it's got an inscription and so on, which she hadn't noticed.
Right.
And I said, well, I don't really want it in the house. I felt from the off, I just thought, no, I don't want this in the house. I don't want it on the walls, definitely, which is what she had in mind. And to cut a long story short, because I'm really spoiling, so this would take about an hour to tell it properly. I was annoyed because I didn't want it in the house. And she said, well, look, okay. So she put it away. Now, I didn't know where she'd put it. Well, actually, at first, I did know where she put it. She put it on a shelf where alongside some books, some cooking books and stuff in the kitchen. Now, a few days later, I'd come home on my own from work. I was a builder's rep selling materials. I popped in for a coffee. No one was home. I popped into the kitchen. And I just noticed that the plate wasn't where I'd seen it, where she'd put it away, sort of wrapped it up and put it away again. And my first thought was a bit of, it sounds daft, but a bit of panic, because I thought she'd put it on the wall somewhere. So I went wandering off around the house looking for this plate stuck on a wall somewhere. And it wasn't. I couldn't find it anywhere, so I put it out of my mind. Now, a week or so later, I came home from work about sort of 6 o'clock in the evening, and my wife was quite, I wouldn't say upset, but she was quite shook up because she'd had a strange experience in the morning. Now, this was like a weekday morning. She'd had about 3 other mothers around. They had regular coffee mornings with the toddlers. So they've got a few toddlers waddling about. And they were all sat in our front room. They'd been in the kitchen, but they'd closed the door behind them. And they closed it because it was connected to the garage, and obviously there's dangerous materials. They didn't want the toddlers going off through the kitchen and ending up in the garage. So they were all sat in the sitting room just gossiping and drinking their coffee. And all of a sudden there was a hell of a crash from the kitchen of something breaking. So they rushed out to opened the door and had a look. And there were bits of pottery, crockery, I think crockery is a better word, isn't it?
Yeah.
All over the floor, all over the kitchen floor, just smashed to pieces. So at first they didn't know what it was, but as one of the girls bent down and sort of asked where the dustpan was and so on, my wife Alison said to them, oh, before you start sweeping it up, can I just have a look at it? So she got a few bits together, and it turned out, yes, it was that plate. It was that particular plate. Now, that in itself doesn't sound weird at all, really. It could have fallen off a countertop or whatever. But what was weird about that was she had taken it off of that bookshelf, which is why I couldn't see it when I came home that day a few days earlier, and unknown to me, she'd put it in a cupboard in a wall cupboard on the second shelf, like one of these cupboards with just like the 2 levels.
Oh yeah.
On the upper level, she'd put it on top of other plates that weren't used generally, so it was actually resting on top of other plates in a neat pile, but it was wrapped in, and I think it was wrapped in paper. I can't remember that, to be honest. So I don't know where the paper ended up, but it was actually stuck away in this cupboard, and the door was shut. They hadn't been in that cupboard because there was no need to be in that cupboard, and the door was actually closed as well. That was even weirder. That not only had that somehow, I mean, she's absolutely convinced that to this day that she put it in that cupboard and closed the door on it, but that cupboard door was closed. It wasn't even open. Even for it to just be open would be weird enough.
I guess, yeah.
But for it to be actually closed, and that was the plate on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
That was just, and it's an amazing, weird, and I can't explain it. I just can't explain it. So again, it was happening in that house. Now we know there was something in that house, definitely. And I've tracked that house actually. I mean, you can go online and find this house. It's just a regular 3-bed modern semi-detached, and it comes up for sale very, very frequently because I've noticed this. And I think everybody has similar problems, and they just think, I don't want to move away from it. It's quite an oppressive feeling. You don't feel comfortable in it.
Do you think that houses like humans maintain memories?
Yes, I do really. But whether that's us as people sort of interacting with that atmosphere, I don't know. I suppose it is, because we sort of read that information, don't we, somehow, sort of instinctively. But yeah, it's both, isn't it? I think it's the houses and it's also the people. I mean, what I'm saying is, if you weren't inclined to actually see this stuff and experience this stuff, you might be able to live in that house and not have any problems. It's almost like you'd be blind to it. That's my thinking on it.
I was speaking to a guest earlier tonight about property that we buy at garage sales or at auctions or in antique stores.
Yes, yeah.
How can we be assured that we're just not bringing home just the furniture, but we're also bringing some attachments?
Yeah, I totally get that, because that is what I feel happened with the plate, almost certainly. And it is becoming more accepted now, I think. I mean, it's I think you've got this guy who does the Haunted Collectors show, and he, time and time again, he's been finding this for probably 20, 30 years. I mean, for me, it's only happened through personal experience, and I've come to believe that myself. I'm sure there is something in that. But why that is, I mean, who knows,
So what would you say to someone who believes their house is haunted? What should they do?
I think you see, with me, I've never had a problem with it, really. I mean, that particular story I've just told you, yeah, that was a little bit uneasy, but we had a happy life in that house. It wasn't too bad, I would say leave well alone unless you really feel that it needs, clearing. I also believe you can actually just ask nicely, sort of mentally, and it may well be that they'll leave you alone, whoever they are, whatever they are. So yeah, I think it depends on how serious the problem is. If there's stuff flying around the house and all this sort of heavy stuff, and yeah, get something done or move. But in my case, it's always been quite harmless. We have stuff here. I live in a Victorian semi now, and we occasionally get sort of what sounds like little girls speaking over our sleeping bodies. Well, not sleeping when we hear them, obviously. But we don't feel threatened by it. It's almost as if they are children that lived here once before. The house is over 100 years old. People would have lived and died in this house many times. So I feel that they're possibly just visiting the house, and maybe they're looking at us and thinking, well, who are these people and what are they doing in my bedroom? Maybe we're haunting them.
That is true.
So,
that is true, because people never take the side of the ghost or the spirit.
That's right.
I have often wondered how ghosts and spirits feel that we are looking at them as an oddity. We are trying to capture their image one way or another. And is this being disrespectful to the spirit or the ghost?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're here to learn, aren't we? We're trying to get to the bottom of this mystery. So we need to do that. We need to have people who are prepared to do all the technical stuff and try and capture images and voices and all the rest of it, because that's the only way we can move forward, isn't it? I don't think it's. I think it is offensive if you've got like these ghost hunting shows and they sort of goad, they taunt whatever it is that's there, just for TV, just for sensationalism. I think that's wrong, totally wrong. They can be very, very rude. I mean, you wouldn't treat a living person like that. So why treat? I mean, that's another thing, isn't it? We don't know that these were once living people. But, you get all these people who are very dogmatic in their views about what a ghost is, but we don't really know. So so I know people who would just automatically jump to the default position over people that lived here once, and I think there's a little bit of that, but maybe there's other energies that are coming in and out from other, parallel universes or whatever, or. I think it's a bit of everything. It's very, very complicated, and and our little brains will take a long time to even get close to understanding it.
What's your take on UFOs?
I think it's all connected, almost a bit. I've had experiences where the two. I mean, I've never seen one, not knowingly. I've never seen one knowingly. But I think they're connected because a few experiences I've had, for example, I'll just tell you quickly, I saw something in a tent when I was camping at Corfe Castle in Dorset, which had elements of both. I had this sort of strange blue light coming into the tent, which woke me up, and it had a certain sort of weird feeling about it,
right.
which when it happens. And it is something that has happened periodically throughout my life, not in the last 10 years, but it has happened. And you recognize it as soon as it happens, and you think, oh dear, here we go again. I've had this before. So and it was like a strange light, but not a strange light in the sky, but a strange light in the tent. But it's happened in the bedroom before over the, every few years or so. Now, I think that's possibly connected with what people would call UFOs. But I don't think they're coming from other planets either. I think I think it's parallel universes of some sort, way in advance of us, different levels. But also each one of those experiences had something that was very ghostly about it. So it sort of straddled the two realms, So I think they're connected. They're all coming out of that same place where, that's the best way I can describe it, really. But getting back to the one at Corfe Castle.
Yes.
When I experienced that alongside two of my mates, we were both I think we were about 20, 21. I was in a sleeping bag with one either side of me. It was sort of 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and saw a very dark figure inside the tent, which was as tall as the tent, which isn't that tall. It was probably 7 foot. And I tried to wake up my mates to show them what I was seeing, but I couldn't move at all. It's, the old sleep paralysis thing. I just could not move. But I could clearly see this thing, and there was some sort of communication going on. Now, whether that was a dream, I don't know, but it seemed very real to me. And as you can imagine, we're sort of 19, 20, 21. My mates, when I told my mates in the morning, it was a big joke. And to this day, if I meet them, occasionally it will come up in the pub, and they'll say, oh, tell us about the crazy man in the tent or whatever, But what's interesting about that is that when I went to write all that story down to sort of remember it and put it there for my family history more to start with. I thought, well, I'll do a little bit of research and find out whether anybody else has seen anything there. Now, bear in mind, this was like the early 80s.
Right.
And I found that the local newspapers and so on, if you go online, they tell you that many people have seen what they refer to as a dark night, which sort of comes back to my website as well. I think that's partially why I used it. And they say they've seen it in the same field where I saw mine. So that was nice for me because it made me realise, not that I didn't need convincing anyway, but it was like verification to me that other people see this stuff as well in the same places.
Tell me, the pub that you go to, is it haunted?
I don't tend to go in pubs these days, but there are a few haunted ones around here.
Why do you think that ghosts hang around in pubs?
I think it's a connection with spirit, isn't it? Spirits. No, I don't know. Actually, I was in a haunted pub last week. I was up country in a place called High Wycombe, and I gave a talk on my book for about 2 hours. And before I did that, I was chatting to some of the locals at the bar, and I'd never met them in my life, And they said, "Oh, why are you here?" And I said, "Well, I'm giving a talk in a while." And of course, when you tell people these things, they've always got a story. And this chap at the bar started telling me all his stories, and he had some fantastic stories. And he claimed to just, a few months earlier, he was on his own in this old pub, and he said he saw this sort of just this black foggy figure appear from behind a wall or through a wall, walk across the bar area, then disappear through the bar. And he said his automatic reaction was to look at his beer and think, there's something in here. So I think they're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, I think they're all around us, and it's just I think maybe we have to be relaxed and sort of zoned out to actually tune into them. If we're absolutely obsessed with our everyday life and worrying about what we're going to do next and appointments and so on, we're probably not going to see anything. But I think occasionally we're very relaxed, and that's when they tend to make themselves known. I mean, my book talks about these.
Listen. I hate to do this, but we're getting very close on time. I've got about a minute left. What are your final thoughts for the X-Zone Nation tonight?
Well, I'd just say to everybody that thank you very much for listening, and it's been a pleasure to come on and chat with you. And we've really just not even scratched the surface. Yeah. And if they're interested, the book is called Wyatt's Weird World, and there's so much more detail on history. There's everything. There's quite a lot of humour as well, because I don't take myself too seriously. I've experienced this stuff, but I'm not going to tell you that I know what the stuff is. I'm aware of what other people think it is. I'm very, very clued up on what people think this stuff is, but I'm open-minded, and I'm a very skeptical person myself. If people tell me stories, I'm very skeptical. I'm even skeptical about what I've seen, and I know I've seen stuff, and I know I've heard stuff, but I'm even skeptical about them myself.
All right, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mark, and let our listeners know what your website is one more time, please.
Okay, it's called It's a Dark, Dark Night, and the book is called Wyatt's Weird World, available on Amazon Kindle.
All right, thanks so much for joining us all the way from the United Kingdom. X-Zone Nation, my guest this hour was Mark Wyatt. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking all our guests tonight. Hour number 1 was Christopher St. Booth. Hour number 2, Howard Blum. And Howard number 3 was Mark Wyatt. Now, on tomorrow night's show, we have Dr. Jeffrey Krepal in our first hour. Dale Kazmarek, a good friend of the X-Zone, is going to be with us in hour number 2. And hour number 3, Richard DeRose. Well, that's it for tonight, X-Zone Nation. I want to thank each and every one of you for sharing your day, your night, no matter where you are on this great big world of ours here in the X-Zone. So until tomorrow night, take care of each other. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow night from 11 o'clock p.m. until 2 o'clock Eastern, right here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and on TalkStream Live. Until tomorrow night, my good friends, always remember, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night, everyone.